Hello and welcome to our Arts 21 special, Art, Struggle, Liberty.
It began 3 years ago. On December the 17th, 2010, Tunisian fruit vendor Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire to protest the daily harassment that the city authorities subjected him to. It was the spark that ignited the Arab world and led to the toppling of the Tunisian regime. The protests soon reached Cairo. In Egypt and elsewhere, artists are at the forefront of the battle against authoritarianism and oppression. The uprisings have long since spread around the globe. The protests in Ukraine are the most recent example. They share a common goal: more freedom, more transparency. Also in the digital world. The revelations by US whistleblower Edward Snowden have shown how government intelligence services are accessing our data on a massive scale. Now 560 leading authors from around the world, from Günter Grass to Arundhati Roy, have signed an appeal calling for an end to this mass surveillance.
It shows a complete lack of respect, and I won't accept that. It's not just about me. It harms society when they interfere with our freedom of opinion.
Around the world, anger is growing, as is the wave of protests. In Istanbul, citizens took to the streets to halt the planned destruction of Gezi Park, sparking weeks of demonstrations in the city and beyond. Turkish choreographer Erdem Gündüz became an icon of peaceful resistance. Standing man, he stood silently on Istanbul's Taksim Square for hours on end. Soon thousands joined him. In Bulgaria, mass outrage toppled the government. Led by students, artists and intellectuals, mass protests against the corruption of the entrenched political elite continue to this day.
When there is an economical crisis, what you call the economists to deal with it. But when there's a morality crisis, then people from the arts are the people who must come and change things.
Like a seismograph, artists around the world are registering every upheaval in the struggle for freedom. But like the Russian punk activists' Pussy Riot, artists are among the first victims when the state strikes back. Art as a weapon for a better future. What are the prospects? Our reporters have traveled around the world in search of answers. Art, Struggle, Liberty, an Arts 21 special edition from Mexico, Sudan, Russia and Egypt.
In Egypt, artists are battling to salvage the revolution in the way they know best. The documentary Art War describes their struggle.
شاف نظام خير ما بين حكمه والفوضى في البلاد كان فاكر حكمه يوم هيخليه في أعلى مكان.
Changes are never produced by the majority of the population. It's always been minorities that have changed their societies fundamentally, because they are the most active.
People like Amar, one of Egypt's best-known graffiti artists. He dreams of democracy and justice, and he takes to the streets for them, using walls as his canvas and risking imprisonment. He paints the struggle's heroes and martyrs. The film is about him and other courageous artists. In Art War, music and art stand in stark contrast to war and violence.
I think graffiti and street art illustrate the revolution, illustrate the street fights, illustrate the hopes and dreams of the young people who brought down Mubarak and who've basically also brought down the Muslim Brotherhood.
The paintings document the events as no news stories can, through the senses, metaphorically and emotionally. That's why they're so strong. Many of their motifs are inspired by the millennia-old tradition of Egyptian mural painting. Before the revolution, graffiti were forbidden and rarely seen. Now, street art reflects the political upheavals.
الثورة منتصرة عشان خاطر خلاص هم مش هيقدروا
The more brutal the government, the more creative and determined the artists become. And they press charges. In November 2011, when pictures of a police sniper deliberately aiming at demonstrators' eyes appeared on the internet, artists used their graffiti to search for him and brought him to court. We meet director Marco Wilms in Berlin. When he saw the images of the Egyptian protests in 2011, he was fascinated. He followed the revolution with his camera for 2 years, driven by events. Time and again, he put himself at risk.
I had the feeling I was running for my life. I could feel muzzle flashes near my head. Molotov cocktails were flying.
German-Egyptian journalist Hamed Abdel Samad, one of his main figures, became a target. During filming, fanatical Islamists pronounced a fatwa against Abdel Samad, accusing him of having insulted Islam. Recently, he was abducted in Cairo by persons unknown and disappeared for days. Who exactly was behind it remains unclear. There's no sign of an end to the turmoil in Egypt. The graffiti artists are now heroes themselves, far beyond the borders of their own country. They create their paintings around the world, from New York to Berlin, like these works here by Ganzier and Amar.
Hello.
Marco Wilms is still very close to the artists. He communicates via Skype to Amar in Cairo.
Yeah. I saw your painting in Mahmoud Street, the first one.
Yeah, you like the pink?
Yeah, it's great. Pink camouflage.
Pitting color against the newly strengthened military, brushes against bullets.
Do you think, is it safe to show our film in Cairo, or is it dangerous?
If it's dangerous, it's for us, not for you.
The film also accompanies Amar to Luxor, his hometown. The Sufi community there is open and tolerant. Many artists feel this could be a chance for all of Egypt, but the reality is different.
After 2.5 years, it's back to square one. There was an attempt at Islamist dictatorship. Now the army's in charge again, arresting people, wanting to limit the right to demonstrate, and to make graffiti a punishable offense. Despite that, the artists aren't giving up. They still hope they'll win in the end, that their dream of revolution will become reality.
And that dream is the subject of his film, Art War.
Now to Russia, where free speech can land you in deep trouble. We ask one of the country's leading writers about Russia today.
A gay rights demonstration in Moscow. A homophobic crowd reacts with violence. Tensions have been running high since Moscow moved to ban so-called homosexual propaganda in June 2013. Protests in Russia and abroad are becoming more vocal. But Russian writer Viktor Yerofeyev doesn't think Russia's gay and lesbian community has that much to worry about.
In the Soviet Union, we had terrible laws about homosexuality. Now these people try to show that Europe is decadent and Europe is falling down. These laws about homosexuality, they are terrible on the surface, but for homosexuals nothing happened and nothing changed.
Perhaps Yerofeyev can talk like this because he's one of the privileged. Though expelled from the Soviet Writers' Union and banned from publishing until the late 80s, he nonetheless has powerful contacts. As a child, he lived in Paris, where his father was a diplomat under Stalin. The writer has always moved between ideologies. His latest novel, Akimudi, not yet translated into English, is another satirical take on Russia.
I believe that if someone wants to kill the system, it's better to make it ridiculous, but not to criticize it very seriously.
So you want to kill the system?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, every time people who are going to make a revolution, they believe in their own nation, their population, and they believe that population is ready to take this revolution. I don't think so. And they have a lot of still Soviet values, Orthodox values, nationalist values, para-fascist values, and it's very divided.
He points out that most protest is taking place in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Yerofeyev's hope lies with younger Russians who are prepared to go out on the street to protest against President Vladimir Putin and his associates.
I think that this young generation will emerge new leaders, and finally Putin is not so young, and finally not so young for a president, and I think that Russia in 20 years will come very close to Europe.
But for now, Russian activists and journalists have to fear for their freedom, some for their life. Members of Pussy Riot were arrested and sentenced to long spells in labor camps after staging a protest in Moscow's most famous church. They've become global symbols of resistance.
If I knew that what would have happened, I'll be with them just in the church, because their feelings are my feelings as well.
What about the role of the church in Russia?
People who are the leaders of the church, their souls really to the Russian state. What could happen really bad in Russia if the state and the church unite already for ruling together, and the Orthodox civilization could appear, so-called, and then say, if you are not Orthodox, if you do not belong to our church, so you are an enemy of Russia.